All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to talk about every team's head coach and where I have them ranked heading into 2024. But before I get into it, I just want to say leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already, and a couple things to address. So, pretty much all the first time head coaches are not ranked within this slideshow, but Quinn is ranked and Harbaugh is ranked as well. I think we've seen enough of those guys at high level football to have a ranking for them over these past few years, but Pierce isn't ranked, Mayo's not ranked, Macdonald's not ranked, and talking about Pierce in particular, I don't have him ranked because we haven't seen a full season out of him yet, but let's just start with him. So it's too early to tell how he'll be and how he'll fare as a Raiders head coach because he only coached for half the season, and he was cleaning up the slack that McDaniels had left behind. In McDaniels, he created an absolutely disastrous culture and an absolutely disastrous locker room. But when Pierce took over, not only was this team playing for each other, but they were playing like Raiders, which is something this team has not had in a very long time, at least since they were in Oakland. And I'm expecting a lot of big things out of the Raiders defense heading into next year because the defense in particular for the Raiders was playing absurdly well once Pierce had taken over and once he was, calling the plays, once he was more involved with the prep and the game planning for the defense in general. Now, what I think might let them down is, unfortunately, the QB situation is very, very shaky, but you do have Devontae Adams, you do have Jacoby Myers, you do have Michael Mayer, and you just added Brock Bowers to your group of weapons. So, yeah, let's see how the Raiders do next year, but that's a little about Antonio Pierce and some more about an unproven head coach in Brian Callahan. Now, I genuinely do not know how the Titans will look because they did spend a lot in free agency. Granted, they did spend on some players who are older, but a lot is riding on if Will Levis is the future for this organization. And is he the future? I mean, maybe. I was not a big Levis guy coming out of Kentucky. I didn't like a lot of what I saw last year, but I think they've put him in a situation to where he could be successful and they could be a diet version of the Bengals offense because you have good skill position weapons and you have a QB with a big arm who was older coming out of college, so he was relatively battle tested. And yeah, so the Titans are once again a huge coin flip for me, and we'll just see. Once again, is Levis the truth? It'll be a big part of Callahan's reputation, and if he's not the truth, then you've done a good job at building this team to where you can easily move off him and bring someone else in as well. So Dave Canales, head coach of the Carolina Panthers, he was instrumental last year in getting Baker and the Bucs offense in particular to completely overperform and shatter any expectations we had going into the year. Because when you think about the teams that were projected to be the very worst in the league last year, you had the Panthers, nobody had the Panthers that low, but you had the Bucs, you had the Cardinals, and you had the Texans. And Canales did an incredible job with what looked like an incredibly sad quarterback competition heading into the offseason between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask to completely revitalizing Baker Mayfield's career and having him playing some of the best football of his life, at least since 2021. And the success for Dave Canales this year, it is not what the Panthers look like record-wise, because we know it's probably going to be a tough year. You could always surprise some people and take the division because it is going to be a relatively weak division, although the Falcons and Buccaneers, I believe, both ended up getting better. So we'll see about that. But ultimately, we could be looking at a 5-12 Panthers team, and people could be like, yeah, Dave Canales is him, much similar to what we did with Dan Campbell and the Lions not too long ago. So yeah, Jerod Mayo. So hopefully he can carry over the defensive success from Belichick. And what I'm most interested to see with this transition and all this turnover happening in the New England regime right now, new GM, new head coach, new quarterback, what I'm finally most interested to see is they finally have new coordinators. Like, long gone are the days where you're bringing in Josh McDaniels or Bill O'Brien or Matt Patricia even to run your offense just because they're familiar with the team. So now Alex Van Pelt is going to be running the Patriots offense, and there might be some growing pains, especially because they have a very, very young receiver room, and obviously they have a rookie quarterback, and I think Brissett is probably going to start until like maybe week 4 or 5 maximum, in my opinion, because I think May is going to be too talented to keep off the field. And once again, highly drafted rookies, they just find their way onto the field for some reason. It just happens. So, yeah, we'll see about that. If there is one thing going for the Patriots, it's that they have not really had a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball over the past few years, but they've always performed. Like, even last year, the defense was still good, still a very well-disciplined unit, and that's what you're going to have playing under Bill Belichick. And let's hope that, maybe not let's hope, depending on how you feel about the Patriots, but for all my friends who are Patriots fans and all the people watching who are Patriots fans, let's hope they can continue the defensive success. And I'm excited to see Gonzalez in particular in his second year in the league, coming back from his injury. Now, sorry, my camera's cutting off the Mike Macdonald in the top right-hand screen, but so Mike Macdonald, I'm expecting a lot from the Seahawks D this year, just because this team, their identity has really softened up since the Legion of Boom days. I know that Pete Carroll was always sticking to the plan of, these really physical guys in the secondary, but once again, you had all that great defensive talent throughout Pete Carroll's tenure, and they never really did much with it. It was actually their defense that tended to let them down more than the offense, while Pete Carroll was running the Russell Wilson Seahawks from, I want to say, 2015 to 2021, and then obviously the Geno Smith Seahawks over the past 2 years. The offense played very, very well, and I think this is Mike Macdonald was a good counter hire for what the Seahawks need immediately on their team. Now, I know you're hiring for the future, and you're hiring a guy who can hopefully be a head coach for your team for a very, very long time, and I'm interested to see how the organization reacts to this new philosophy, because they went from Pete Carroll, who's like as old school as they come, who's always smacking gum on the sidelines and always the A1 motivator for his players and a player's coach, to Mike Macdonald, and it looks like he's more of an X's and O's guy, but he's still relatively liked in the locker room. So big loss for the Baltimore Ravens here, but huge game for the Seattle Seahawks. Raheem Morris. Now, I didn't rank him because I don't think we have a big enough sample recently for me to rank him. I know he was an interim head coach with the Falcons, I want to say not too long ago, but still, that was a 4-game sample size. I really wasn't excited about this hire, because I think when you look at what the Falcons were going for this offseason, a lot of people were surprised they didn't hire Bill Belichick, but ultimately, I'm really not that surprised. Bill Belichick just really did not fit with the identity of the team and what they wanted to start building within their organization, but Raheem Morris, since the game is transcending more towards young offensive coordinators, and by the way, being hired as head coaches, and Morris is neither of those. He's a savant on the defensive side of the ball. He hasn't coached in a very long time, and hopefully he's learned from his tenure in Tampa Bay, because his Tampa Bay tenure was absolutely disastrous. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But he went to the Rams, and they did have a very good defense throughout his time there. Granted, he had some amazing assistants there, like, no doubt about that. But we'll see how the defense does. Like, I'm interested to see if they run the stuff that Evero runs in Carolina, if the stuff that, all those descendants from the Rams pipeline, all the stuff like within the Fangio defense. I'm interested to see if Raheem Morris is going to be running that scheme in Atlanta. So Zach Robinson and the skill position weapons for the Falcons are what matter more for this team heading into 2024. Like, it matters way more what the offense looks like, because we know we have a reasonable expectation of the Falcons defense, but the big thing will be, does Zach Robinson finally get the ball to Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson? It's something that's going to be talked about ad nauseum this offseason, and we'll see if it pays off. So now the guys who I'm actually ranking, coming in at dead last, I have Matt Eberflus. So he is not a good head coach. Last year, his only wins came against relatively non-impressive teams. Like, the Lions win was the only relatively impressive one he's had over the past few years. I know that they beat the 49ers in a hurricane in Week 1 in 2022, but still, I don't take a lot of stock into that. And the Bears, they had multiple defensive collapses late last year in games they completely should have won. Like, they should have beat the Broncos, they should have beat the Lions, they should have beat the Browns. And that happens. That happens if they have a more competent figurehead and a more competent person being in control of the defense And trading for Montez Sweat basically saved their season. But for a while there, it looked like they were going to have 2 picks in at least the top 5. But they overperformed at the end of last year, and they beat up on some really bad teams. Like, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I really wasn't impressed with a lot of the teams they actually ended up beating. Like, they beat Carolina, they beat Arizona, they beat some other teams that were absolutely trash, Atlanta, in the back half of the year in the snow as well. But they're repeating the same mistake they made in 2021 because they paired Matt Nagy and Justin Fields together, and now they're doing the same thing in 2024. This time, you just have a much better QB prospect than Justin Fields was. So hopefully it turns out differently, and we'll see where we go from there. 25, I have Dennis Allen. So he is a great defensive mind. He's a great defensive coordinator, but unfortunately, the Saints are way too often unprepared in big games. Like, you look at the Lions game from last year, you look at the Rams game from last year, and this team completely got blown out in the first half. And people are just like, well, at least they came back in the second half and they made it relatively close. Like, I mean, sure, but there was no reason for the game to get that out of hand in the first place. And I'm just more concerned about how he fits in with this roster, because the Saints are an organization that really don't hold a lot of people accountable. Like, Mickey Loomis probably has job security for life. And one of the bad things about being in the salary cap situation that the Saints are in is you can't really add a lot of new talent unless you have a ton of draft picks. And the Saints really don't have that many draft picks to work with year in and year out. And they have an aging roster. And the defensive side of the ball in particular, you have Demario Davis, you have Tyrann Mathieu, and Cameron Jordan leading the way. And obviously you still have pieces on the defensive side of the ball. And you do have good pieces on offense like Olave and, I mean, Shaheed and Perry. You have a good receiving core in Johnson. So you have good skill position weapons, but at the same time, this team is getting really, really old, and potentially I could see a really bad season from this team. I actually made a video not too long ago saying that I'm really not optimistic about their outlook in 2024. So let's see. Time will tell if this rating holds up. But yeah, 24, we have Robert Saleh from the New York Jets. Now, this is mainly due to the fact that his record as a head coach is 18-33, and that's not good because we know that he can run a defense. Like, the Jets defense is absolutely nasty. In my defense video, I had them ranked as the 2nd highest defense in the league heading into 2024, and I think that's a testament to Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas for what they've been able to build on the defensive side of the ball, because they have talent everywhere. They have talent on the front 7, they have talent in the secondary, and that defense is absolutely suffocating. And if they can get anything going on the offensive side of the ball, then this team is going to be a nightmare to play against. Unfortunately, the offensive side of the ball is the real elephant in the room here, because while Saleh has been in control of the New York Jets, they have never gotten that going. Even having great players like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, they have never been able to get the offensive side of the ball going. Will it get better with Rodgers? I mean, it remains to be seen, but I'm not too convinced. I've been saying it all offseason on this channel. I am not too convinced that 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers is going to offer you that much in terms of being an upgrade from what you've had in the past. Like, it wouldn't surprise me, no doubt about that. It actually wouldn't surprise me if he regained some of his 2022 form where he was at least decent. But asking him to be the Aaron Rodgers of old, like, that's just not going to happen. And will that be good enough behind a team that's had really bad skill position depth, even with Breece and Garrett Wilson? And will that be good enough for a team that has had a lot of problems staying healthy on the offensive line over the past few years? Yeah. So Dan Quinn, make no mistake about it, I truly believe that if he had not had Matt Ryan and Julio Jones throughout his time in Atlanta, his all-time record would probably be slashed in half, and that's not an exaggeration. And I am not excited about this hire, because for Commanders fans, this was for one reason and one reason only. Adam Peters had the goal this past year to just rebuild the culture of the Commanders organization. Why do you think he's bringing in guys like Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner and Austin Eckler in the year 2024? Is it because he's expecting those guys to be like impact contributors? No, not even a little bit. It's 2024. But the goal of Adam Peters is to completely revamp the culture of the Washington Commanders, to completely revamp the culture of being the bottom feeders of the NFC East, and finally get fans in DC excited about football again. Because with the Dan Snyder regime, there was a lot to be unexcited about in the DC area as far as football, and probably all the bandwagon fans switched over to Baltimore. But regardless, this is going to be an upgrade over Rivera. Like, for all the smack I just talked about Dan Quinn, I could very well expect this Commanders defense under Quinn to look a lot better than the Falcons defense under Quinn. And this is just due to the fact that Quinn, when he was with Dallas, I know that he had less responsibilities just as a defensive coordinator in general. But the Cowboys, they played extremely aggressive, and they had, I'm pretty sure they probably led the league in takeaways for 3 straight years. Because 21, 22, 23, yeah. And that's without looking it up off the top of my head. But Dan Quinn, he's always that coach that gets brought up in your team's forums, in your team's like Reddit section, where people are just like, you know, what do you think about him? He's been to a Super Bowl. And then the top comments are just like, I mean, maybe, but he's just a retread hire that you just want to hire when you rebuild your culture. And that's what I think ultimately this is. And I think he's just a placeholder for the next great coordinator. I know they really went after Ben Johnson, and there was some mudslinging there at the end as far as why they didn't choose Ben Johnson and why he didn't choose them. Regardless, I think it's more of a placeholder for maybe Slowick, maybe Evero, and just other guys who we project to be head coaches in the NFL. So 22, Brian Daboll. I think he's going to get a lot of patience, or he's asking for patience from the Giants fans, and you know what? I'll give it to him. Even as somebody that completely dunks on the Giants pretty much every chance I get on this channel, because I'm just really not a fan of the way the roster is set up, and I think that Mara is an absolute doofus of an owner. They had a really tough situation last year because you lost Daniel Jones, and then you lost Tyrod Taylor, and you were down to Tommy DeVito as your quarterback, and for some reason you started winning games. So you were not bad enough to get a premier quarterback in the draft. And now it's time to see if Daniel Jones can be a franchise quarterback, because 90% of me says absolutely not. 10% of me says maybe. He had a good year in 2022, but the Giants were very injured last year. They had about as worst case scenario of a year as you could have imagined if you were a player or an executive on that team. And I do think he's safe for 2024, despite the fact that he's in the New York market, despite the fact that they have not had a lot of success under him. Like, yes, they reached the divisional round, but last year was an absolute catastrophe. I think you have to give him one more year. And I think he's also safe for 2025 as well, because if they are bad again this year, which I'm kind of expecting, then you'll at least go into the offseason next year with the excuse of, all right, the team played well, but let's see what they can do without Daniel Jones. And they have a built-in excuse if this year fails. So I know New Yorkers are relentlessly impatient, but you might have to be a little more patient with Brian Daboll. And this isn't like a he's bad ranking. It's just more of he's an unproven candidate ranking. Now with Doug Pederson and the Philadelphia Eagles, now there are only 7 active head coaches in the NFL with Super Bowl rings, and Doug Pederson is one of them. So you may be asking yourself, how did this guy win a Super Bowl, yet he's all the way down here at 21? And my answer to that is it created a lot of arrogance and rift within the building, because it seems like him and Howie Roseman completely wanted different things and had really, really different philosophies as far as how to proceed with, internal candidates and coaching and coordinators and all that. And I'm sure you all remember the absolute disastrous Nate Sudfeld game in 2020. And Doug Pederson did no wrong in that game, because if you know that your team is not going to be competitive, and you know that your team is going to lose a game and it's going to do you better ultimately in the long run than good, then why not lose? Unfortunately, it got Doug Pederson fired. So I agreed with his process, but it got him fired. But he went to Jacksonville, and before anyone says he made the playoffs in Jacksonville, I just want to hammer one thing home. He made the playoffs in a year where the Texans and Colts were picking in the top 4 of the NFL draft, and the winner-take-all game against the Tennessee Titans was between Josh Dobbs, who hadn't truly broken out yet, and Malik Willis at quarterback. Like, they didn't have Tannehill that game, and the Jaguars still barely edged that one out. And I think if Brandon Staley doesn't exist and he's not a complete doofus. We're talking about the Doug Pederson Jaguars in an entirely different light. And yeah, they have had some bad luck. Like, I will give you the Lawrence injury completely unraveled the team last year. But this guy is completely derailing his career for Press Taylor. Like, I cannot tell you the amount of screens I saw on 3rd and long last year that made me absolutely nauseous. And the highs for Doug Pederson throughout his NFL career have been very high. But the lows, like akin to this past year, where you absolutely collapsed, you were 8-3 at one point, then ended up missing the playoffs altogether. That's one of the very, very low lows that have come with having Doug Pederson as your head coach. So, yeah. Now 20, we have Jonathan Gannon, and he was set up to fail spectacularly, and he still got 4 wins. And this team was insanely tough to play against. Like, once again, I said in my video yesterday that they had that early Dan Campbell Lions energy where you know that they probably didn't have the talent and they didn't have the guys to ultimately pull out a win in the end of most of their games last year. But they did not go away easily, and they are going to be even tougher to play against this next year because they're going to have Kyler for a full year, and you just added one of the best wide receiver prospects we've seen in quite some time. So you have Kyler Murray throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr. and a Trey McBride who broke out. And not to mention, the Arizona Cardinals had the best run game in the league last year from week 10 onwards. So I know that he's a defensive guy, but the cupboards were really bare. You didn't have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and that's completely okay. It's not his fault. Him and Austin Furr are still rebuilding this team, but for the first time in a while, there is hope in the desert. Todd Bowles. His record since he has taken over is 17-17, and that feels completely right to me. I don't know why, but that just feels completely right and completely akin to the job he has done with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he coached very well in the back half of last season, and once again, he did keep the team together despite the fact that there was a lot of turmoil and turnover within the building. Like, there was that QB competition, but once again, Canales ended up performing, and so did the entire offense in general. So Bowles, he's a player's coach, and it doesn't seem like there's tons of accountability within that building and within that organization in general. But at the same time, it's a stable organization. Like, Licht is not going to fire Bowles for, even if he misses the playoffs, unless he has like a 5-12 year. That's the only way I could see Bowles getting out. But once again, he was bad when he was a head coach with the Jets, but the Bucs have a lot more talent than the Jets of old did. So, yeah, he also got a B- grade from the NFLPA, which really surprised me. I thought it'd be a lot higher, but I don't know. He's one of those guys where I'm just not really sure where he fits. Like, he was a giant shrug for me in the middle of all of this. So, yeah, coached well in the back half of last season, and he did. He was instrumental in taking down the Philadelphia Eagles. He had the team ready to play. He had the team ready to absolutely blow the Eagles out. But, yeah. So, 18, Shane Steichen. Now, make no mistake about it. I could see Shane Steichen absolutely skyrocketing up this list, assuming I do another one next year as well. Because when you look at what he was able to do last year, it was an absolute masterclass. So, the Colts defense was probably one of the worst in the league. Like, even without looking at the statistics, they kept allowing like 38 points to the most random teams. I remember that they had the Deshaun Watson-less Browns come into their house and put up like 48 on them, I want to say. They had another scrubbalicious team absolutely come in and beat the brakes off of them. I believe it was the Saints. And the fact that he was able to finish a full season 9-8 with Gardner Minshew and carrying Gus Bradley, who I do believe is currently the worst employed defensive coordinator in the NFL, it was an absolutely masterful coaching job. And make no mistake about it, Shane Steichen is going to run the 2022 Eagles offense all over again. You have your Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson. You have your version of Miles Sanders with Jonathan Taylor, who's an upgrade. And you spent a lot and you invested a lot at the wide receiver position. You already had guys like Michael Pittman, who I believe is a great wide receiver one in the NFL. And then behind him, you added Josh Downs in the draft last year, and you also drafted A.D. Mitchell. So there's a lot to like about this offense, and the ceiling is very high. I had to kind of reserve my excitement about Shane Steichen and the Indianapolis Colts when I was making this list. By the way, people are going to accuse me of being a Colts fan. I'm not. But I'm very high on this team. I'm very high on them going into next year, and the AFC South is going to be a gauntlet. Number 17, we have Nick Sirianni. So you look at the 34-17 record, and you're probably just like, wow, that's awesome. And you look at the fact that they made the Super Bowl in his first year as the head coach, and you're just like, wow, that's awesome again. And honestly, a game they should have won. But the collapse in the back half of this past year was absolutely inexcusable. You hired Brian Johnson and Sean Desai, so there does need to be some criticism for that. There does need to be some criticism for how unprepared this team was. They were winning games earlier this year, but there were a lot of games where it honestly looked like they got outplayed. But towards the end of the year, their luck ran out, and then this team showed its true colors in the wildcard game, and I thought that Nick Sirianni was potentially going to get fired. But I think Howie Roseman, he made the correct move. He was like, all right, let's get rid of our trash can coordinators. And it seems to me more that Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen have their fingerprints on the 2022 Philadelphia Eagles team. 3 out of the past 4 guys I've talked about just now. But regardless, you got to give him one more year, because I don't think the collapse is truly who he was, but it remains to be seen if the Super Bowl is truly who he is as well. 16, we have Mike McCarthy. So for all the Cowboys fans that are going to be like, haha, we have our coach higher than Shane Steichen, it's only by 1 spot. But regardless, he came into Dallas as an unexciting hire, in my opinion, because you look at what he did in Green Bay, and unfortunately they just could never get over the hump. And yeah, there has been some bad luck that has not gone his way ever since he was in Green Bay, and that's not the big issue to me. The big issue to me is that this team, come playoff time, looks completely unprepared. 2022 wildcard game against Tampa Bay was the only time I've actually been impressed with the Cowboys in the playoffs. That was probably the most proud of Dak I've been throughout his NFL career. But also, he is not 125-77-2 as the head coach of the Cowboys. That's his Green Bay record. I don't know why I put that. I probably should have double checked before I made this video. But regardless, it's for the most part been the same story in Dallas, where if you remember when they had Aaron Rodgers, when Aaron Rodgers was a peak player in the NFL, they could never get it done. They could never get it done when it mattered most. Like just something would always happen. And then it led to a rift at the end of 2018 where Mike McCarthy ended up getting fired. He took a year off and came back as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and it seems like not a lot has changed. He's a guy who he can potentially win you the division, but that's about it. He'll take you to the divisional round, and then at best, and then when his old team comes into Jerry World, they're going to run you out of the stadium. So 15, Kevin O'Connell. I think schematically he's really sharp, because you listen to him talk, he definitely knows what he is doing. He also got an A+ from the NFLPA, so players definitely enjoy listening to him. And did you guys watch that receiver show on Netflix? Kevin O'Connell absolutely laid into the team after they went 0-2 this past year, after they lost on Thursday Night Football to the Eagles in Week 2 and to the Buccaneers in Week 1. He absolutely just grilled them and ripped them a new one. And it reminded me a lot of Mike Zimmer. But speaking of Mike Zimmer, Kevin O'Connell, he was a desperately needed breath of fresh air within the Vikings organization. And he is, schematically, like I said, a really good coach. But in-game management, it has to get better. Like, some of the play calling that he dials up, I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? Like, they can move the ball between the 20s very well, but when they get to the red zone, it's like all that goes out the window. It's like they call 3 screens to Madison all the time. And the Madison usage this year in particular, this past year, was kind of really what mind-boggled me, because I expected the Vikings to have the worst backfield in the league, like by a long shot, but still, Ty Chandler looked a lot better towards the end of the year, and I think Kevin O'Connell realized that, and he was dealt a rough hand this past year, because you lost Jefferson for a large part of the year, you did lose Cousins, so he did a good job juggling between all those quarterbacks, but still, you finally had a good defense this past year, which you did not have the year before. So literally good offense in 2022, bad defense in 2022, and you pretty much completely flipped those around headed into this past year. And he can develop, but so far he's been a mixed bag. So I'm a little more hesitant, I guess, to crown him in truly rank him among the coaches I consider good in the NFL. Like, I think he's fine, and I think the jury is still out on him, and he could still be a very good coach, especially if he's able to develop McCarthy and they're able to not even miss a beat from losing Cousins, who I believe has played very, very well over the past few years or so. But like I said, this is just like I don't know, I'm cautiously optimistic, but some of the things that have happened within the Vikings and some of their game management makes me really, really uneasy heading into the future. 14, Mike McDaniel. So this team has offensive explosions like no other. You remember, they put up 70 points against the Broncos this year. And when bottom feeders came into Miami this year, you pretty much knew that Achane was going to run for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns at minimum. You knew that Tyreek Hill was going to go for 10 receptions, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns, or something like that. Something absolutely ridiculous, because this team, they can play absolutely ridiculous football. But the problem is, their O-line, when it's healthy, this team is great. But they also just need to be better prepared in big games, and they need to find a counterpunch. And that's why it's so important for Armstead to stay healthy this upcoming year. Because the Dolphins, when they were in their big games and they were missing a lot of O-line starters, it did not bode well for them. So he does have that excuse built into his tenure so far in Miami. But why did you completely collapse against Tennessee? Why were you not prepared in either Buffalo game? And why were you not prepared in the Arctic? Like, is there something that goes on with training at 80, 85 degree weather that says that you can't go into a cold weather place and you can't run the heck out of the ball and you can't cram it down the other team's throat, while you do have guys like Achane and guys like Mostert, and you added Jalen Wright this past offseason too? So yeah, once again, he's the player's coach. Like, if you watch him in in-season Hard Knocks, he's definitely a coach that I would love to play for. But the honeymoon period may run out if the Dolphins fall short at some point this year. 13, we have DeMeco Ryans. He has the respect of the whole city of Houston. Like, if you ask any Texans fan how they feel about DeMeco Ryans, they'll probably tell you that there is no other person that they want running the team. And they've had some real, I don't really know how to describe them, so I put them as wet blankets in my notes down there, because they've had guys like Lovie Smith, they've had guys like Bill O'Brien, so it's pretty nice that they finally have a charismatic coach, a coach who is not that far removed from his playing career. So he's pretty much the AFC's version of Dan Campbell. This past year, they ended up making it to the divisional round, where unfortunately they met the buzzsaw of the Baltimore Ravens. So yeah, but there is nowhere to go but up for the Houston Texans and for CJ Stroud and for DeMeco Ryans, and you should be very happy that this guy is your coach. Number 12, Sean McDermott. So what I will say is that there was a period of time where I was a huge believer in Sean McDermott, but that was 2017, 2018, 2019, where he seemed to overperform and when he had the defense playing at a super high level. But ever since the Josh Allen breakout, I put in my notes that I feel like any competent head coach would have a ring with this version of Josh Allen. And sure, he deserves his credit for helping develop Josh Allen. Granted, a lot of that might have to do to assist from Daboll as well, but the Bills are going backwards. Like, they keep losing big games, and not only do they keep losing big games, they lose them in embarrassing fashion. Like this year against the Eagles, you made it to overtime but still got walked off. This year against the Broncos, you lost because you had 12 men on the field. This year against the Chiefs, you went wide right, and your star receiver, who complained all year about not getting the ball, could not make a catch when it mattered most. And then the year before that, you didn't even show up in the divisional round. Like, the Bengals did whatever they wanted to. And then the year before that, you got 13 seconds against Kansas City. And then the year before that, you lost in the AFC Championship. So this team, they are going backwards as far as their playoff success. And McDermott, he needs to be held accountable, because no longer are the days of Sean McDermott being in those, next great NFL head coaches lists from like 2019. Like, guys who you're just like, yeah, these head coaches are going to win a Super Bowl soon. Like, are they? Because they completely wasted Josh Allen's window, and they completely wasted the propensity to win on that window. And they had to cut a lot of guys last year because Allen's contract is now kicking in and you had to get younger on the defensive side of the ball. So yeah, that's kind of my mini rant about Sean McDermott. I do believe that I still have him top 12 just due to the fact that he has been so successful, and for an organization that has been for a long time just treading water and they were in purgatory of mediocrity for a very long time. Like McDermott, he turned it around, but they might need a new coach to put them over the hump. 11, Kevin Stefanski. This guy made an absolute masterclass of a season happen this past year when they lost Deshaun Watson, and they didn't even get great QB play from Deshaun Watson, but they lost ETR. They were getting trash play from PJ Walker. So what do? You call up Joe Flacco, who was sitting on his couch not long before he got called by the Cleveland Browns, and Joe Flacco was a functional cog in a huge machine that included the league's best defense. This team was absolutely ravaged due to injuries, and they still played great. One thing I will say, if I'm Kevin Stefanski, I'm probably getting a new strength and conditioning staff, because that's what a few teams have done over the past few years that have been heavily injured. Like Denver did it last year. It paid off in a huge way for them, and I hope the Browns can do the same thing. And for an organization that's been painful to watch if you're a fan, he's been absolutely incredible. I know that he only has a 37-30 record, but man, I don't think you could ask for any more from Kevin Stefanski as opposed to what you've gotten. And just in general, I'm really impressed with the work he's done. I know they passed on him for Freddie Kitchens in 2019, but after Freddie Kitchens got fired, they circled back to Stefanski, and it turns out the second choice was the right one. 10, Zac Taylor. So coordinators can develop and get better. Like, you look at his all-time record and his record as the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, and it is heavily skewed due to that 1 year when they lost, I think, 14 games because they went 2-14 with Andy Dalton in 2019, and they got Joe Burrow. And he takes a lot of flack, and a lot of people question his game planning, but towards the back half of the year, if Joe Burrow is healthy, he can take you a long way. Like, his nickname is Joe Shiesty for a reason, and we don't really know how heavily involved Zac Taylor is in the success of the rest of the organization, because he just lets Lou do his thing, and he just lets, his coordinators cook. Granted, Taylor still is the play caller for the Cincinnati Bengals, but regardless, I'm really impressed with what he has been able to do, especially because, you look at the AFC representatives since 2019, or since the February 2020 Super Bowl, and there's two teams. There's the Chiefs and there's the Bengals, and the Bengals made it to the AFC Championship the next year again with a completely injury-ravaged offensive line. And this past year, it was a bit of a rough year for them. It was probably over once Burrow suffered his calf injury in the preseason and in training camp. But I'm expecting this team to be good again. I'm expecting this team to be contenders, because I think we've forgotten how good they can be once they're fully healthy and how good they can be once everything's firing on all cylinders, and Zac Taylor deserves a lot of credit for that. Number 9, Sean Payton. Now, I know that it's become the popular thing to do to completely dunk on Sean Payton and be like, yeah, he's absolutely nothing without Breeze. Yeah, oh my God, how could you send Russell Wilson to purgatory even after he played great this past year? But if you think that Sean Payton is in the wrong over the Russell Wilson situation, you do not know ball. Because what was happening this entire season, people were just dunking on Russell Wilson, and then suddenly Russell Wilson gets cut, or the news comes out that he's likely getting benched and cut, and then people are just like, no, you can't do that. But make no mistake about it, for how little talent the Broncos had on their roster this past year, they should have been a 2-15 or a 3-14 team. And Sean Payton had an absolute masterclass of a season, because not only did they win a lot of games down the stretch, but they won against some very, very quality opponents. So it's time for him to develop his first quarterback in a long time, because he hasn't really had to develop a quarterback since, I don't know, it's been quite a while. But Bo Nix is somebody who fits well into his offense. So going into next year, what do I think about Sean Payton? I think that there is room for improvement. Like, he is pretty bad when the season first opens up. Like, that wasn't even an exclusive to Denver problem. It was always that way in New Orleans. Like, I remember Fitzmagic in 2018 absolutely dunking on the Saints week 1. And I remember Bradford in 2017 week 1, like, same thing, dunking on the Saints. But Payton, I do think he's still one of the premier coaches in the NFL, and there's no coach that I like listening to interviews from more than Sean Payton, because the mix of the broadcasting background as well as knowledge about the game and the team of the Denver Broncos, it just comes out during his interviews. So he's a great interview. I highly recommend you check out his press conferences. Jim Harbaugh. Now, I know that I was not ranking first-year head coaches for the most part, but I ranked Dan Quinn and I ranked Jim Harbaugh because I think there's a big enough sample size from their times in professional football, at least recently, to where I could feel confident ranking them as head coaches and not just, coordinators who are now getting their first time position. Because Jim Harbaugh, he has been coaching at Michigan since, I want to say 2015, 2016, and he's been successful everywhere. In his style of football, it's always build the trenches, run the ball, play good defense, and in an era where running the ball has not been as effective, like last year was probably the least effective. I don't have the numbers to back it up, but it felt like to me that running the ball last year was the least effective it's ever been. And this is due to the fact that the NFL, it's cycle. This is due to the fact that with the NFL, it's cyclical. Like, there are cycles. We go through these things. And with Jim Harbaugh and Michigan, I think that one of the arguments for J.J. McCarthy as a prospect was if you were averaging as many yards per carry as Michigan was averaging last year, I think it was like 7 with Kollmann Edwards, then you would never ever throw the ball. And that remains to be seen. Now, they don't have a lot of talent at the running back position, but what you do have is you do have a very, very talented quarterback. And he's someone that a lot of media members have soured on over the past few years, but a lot of people in the community are like, no, Herbert's still, like, amazing. So that'll come to light, although, like, let's be honest, Herbert is pretty dang good at quarterback. But what does Jim Harbaugh want to do more than anything else, stylistically? What has he always wanted to do? He's always wanted to run the ball. And I don't think that's going to be any different. This is going to be no exception when he comes over to the Los Angeles Chargers. They don't really have a lot in the running back room. Like, yes, they have Gus Edwards. They have J.K. Dobbins, who you can't really expect to stay healthy at this point in his career. They do have Kamani Vidal, who's somebody who got drafted in the 5th round out of Troy, and he was basically their whole offense. So I'm excited about Kamani Vidal, and I kind of expect him to be the next Eckler. And all-time record with the 49ers, 44-19-1. He built a great program in San Francisco, but unfortunately, Jed York chose Balky over him, which looks like a colossal mistake. I'm super duper pumped about Jim Harbaugh coming back to the NFL. Matt LaFleur, he deserves a lot of credit for the work he's done in the league because he completely revitalized Aaron Rodgers' career after it looked like Rodgers had kind of been shaky and not really what he once was. He completely came out and proceeded to have 2 MVP seasons, and that definitely doesn't happen if McCarthy is still running the offense in Green Bay. And what they did this past year, going from Rodgers to Jordan Love and completely transforming the identity of the offense, where you now have 6 or 7 weapons who you can give the ball to on any given play, and you're just like, yeah, I believe that this guy can actually give me something positive on the field, because you have Wicks, you have Reid, you have Dobbs, you have Watson, you have Kraft, you have Musgrave, you have Jacobs, you have Lloyd, you have all those guys on the offensive side of the ball. So Jordan Love, he really doesn't have a lot of excuses, especially because Green Bay is an organization that perennially has a good offensive line. I know they did lose Bakhtiari, and they have lost some of their main forces on the offensive line, and they are going through some retooling at that position in general. But Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love, like, in 2024, it just wheels up for this team. Like, I'm expecting this team to be in a lot of shootouts, and hopefully their defense can finally perform, because Joe Barry is now no longer with the team, so that looks like addition by subtraction. We'll see what goes on with Jeff Hafley, but Matt LaFleur, he was completely underrated in the 2019 hiring cycle, and I kind of wish that my favorite team hired him instead. And yeah, so Matt LaFleur, you are a stud, only outdone by the other NFC North savant in Dan Campbell. He was another handful of coaches to receive an A+ NFLPA grade, and he has been instrumental in the Lions' cultural turnaround. We have seen a lot of the Lions over the past few years, whether it's Dan Campbell's press conferences, whether it's him talking about how much he loves coffee, whether it's I still remember his introduction to Detroit press conference. It was clear as day to me. I remember it like it was yesterday, and it reminded me of, if you've ever watched Ted Lasso, the first episode of Ted Lasso, where Ted Lasso looked like a complete buffoon in his introductory press conference. And Dan Campbell, he was mentored by Sean Payton, so there's nowhere to go up from him. And so Dan Campbell, he was mentored by Sean Payton, and starting out in the Saints organization, he worked his way up, and he became an assistant head coach, and now he's with the Lions and absolutely killing it. And there's nowhere to go but up for him and the Detroit Lions. What I will say is that he has his work cut out for him as far as how they make it back, because now the Lions are going to be a team that every team absolutely circles on their schedule going into next year. I'm pretty sure that every head coach right now who plays Detroit can tell you exactly when on the schedule that they're going to play the Detroit Lions. So he turned the Lions from the NFC's Browns to a team that is very respectable, a team that has youth, a team that's exciting, a team that has a lot of good personalities, a team that's fun and exciting during the offseason, particularly in the draft as well. So hopefully they can make it back, and hopefully they can eventually get that Super Bowl that Lions and the whole state of Michigan absolutely crave. Now, Mike Tomlin, he has done an amazing job every year despite not always having it easy. He had to manage guys like Roethlisberger. He had to manage guys like Antonio Brown. Actually, I shouldn't say he had to manage guys like Antonio Brown. I should say he had to manage AB. And he had to manage guys like Le'Veon Bell, and he did it all with grace. And despite that, this team never ceases to underperform. They are never going to have a 6-11 or a 5-12 season under Mike Tomlin just because he is that good of a coach. And sure, you can say what you want about the Steeler way, and you can say that it's really kind of a fraudulent organizational speak thing, especially because Rooney is not going to have the same legacy. The controlling Rooney right now, Art Rooney II, is not going to have the same legacy as Dan or Art Sr., but still, this team is absolutely amazing. Mike Tomlin's absolutely amazing. He's a player's coach. He can relate to guys really well. And despite the fact that he's been stuck with some awful coordinators, and despite the fact that the Steelers have such organizational structure, which is a good and bad thing, he just continues to perform. And we need to give him a big round of applause for that. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields this upcoming year, it's an upgrade to what you had, but unfortunately they play in a very tough division. So I think 2024 is another retool year for the Steelers, and then hopefully from there on you can develop Fields, and hopefully he can become your quarterback of the future. Now 4, we have Sean McVay. So spoiler alert, I actually have Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan neck and neck. Kyle Shanahan's third. And what my tiebreaker was head-to-head. Because yes, I know McVay has the ring, but Kyle Shanahan has overwhelmingly dominated McVay in head-to-head matchups. And this team is still recovering from when they went all in 2022, or 2021, the 2021 season, and ended up winning the Super Bowl. And they do have a lack of salary cap space, and they do have a lack of picks, but even still, they managed to find some absolute gems. They still managed to find guys like Kyron Williams. They still managed to find guys like Kobe Turner. They still managed to find guys like Puka Nacua. And this team will always perform. In 2022, he pulled Baker Mayfield off the street, and they won some games down the stretch. And this team, despite the fact that it may not have the talent that it did when it reached the Super Bowl, it might not have the talent on the defensive side of the ball. I actually expect the defensive side of the ball to be a little rough next year for the Rams in general. Stafford is just playing some of the best football of his career, which is really saying something because he's played some tremendous football throughout his 15-year NFL career. Now, unfortunately, I do think Stafford might be on some borrowed time, and maybe McVay, because I know he was considering leaving and going into broadcasting instead, but McVay ultimately decided to come back to the Rams, and it paid off, and it was one of the most poetic games ever. So Sean McVay, he's still a player's coach. He's still in phenomenal shape, by the way. If you see pictures of him, he's absolutely jacked. So Sean McVay still has the Rams prepared for anything. He still has 5th-round picks playing like they're all pros, and that is something that we need to give another huge round of applause for. So 3rd, Kyle Shanahan. Now, we can acknowledge the fact that he has built an incredible program in San Francisco. And the pregame offense, like this pre-planned offensive plays, oh my goodness, like there has never been more cohesion, and there has never been like just more anticipation and just overall flawless execution from the offensive side of the ball than what I see from Shanahan offenses. Because when you have Shanahan coaching up all these skill position guys, when you have Shanahan coaching up guys like Ayuk, who, I mean, he's probably getting traded, but guys like Debo, guys like Kittle, who was the late round find, and guys like Christian McCaffrey, who I think is a top 3 running back, top 5 running back ever, then it's absolutely incredible. And then you have Brock Purdy, another guy who you found super duper late. And particularly what should impress you about the 49ers is the way they've been able to retool and find studs on the defensive side of the ball. Like Nick Bosa, yeah, that was kind of an easy pick in 2019. But then you had guys like Fred Warner, you had guys like Greenlaw, you had guys like Hufanga, and just guys who seem to perform. Charvarius Ward is still playing some of the best football of his career. So Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, they do deserve a lot of credit for the program they've built in San Francisco, because the San Francisco 49ers, they didn't have a lot of hope after 2016. But Shanahan and Lynch completely revitalized that. Unfortunately, all that being said, there's a cloud hanging over the career of Kyle Shanahan. And it's not just a cloud in San Francisco. It remains from 28-3 in Atlanta. And I really hope that he can finally get it done. 1, I'm sick of the Chiefs. 2, please, like, I could not imagine if he were to never reach a Super Bowl again, and we had to deal with Kyle Shanahan just being one of the, what could have beens in NFL history, because he is a top 3 coach in the league, in my opinion, for a reason. He is absolutely incredible at what he does, and he does not know anything other than the game of football. Like, he'll admit it. I know people that are close to him from the time he grew up in Colorado. Like, I literally know a dude who went to one of Kyle Shanahan's house parties that he threw at Mike Shanahan's mansion. But still, there's the elephant in the room that hangs over him, and I hope that he can finally get it done for his sake. Now, 2, John Harbaugh, and he runs his team like a college team, and that might be ideal because he's like the CEO. He has Todd Monken doing his thing. He always lets the defensive coordinator do his thing. He's going to be letting Anthony Weaver take the reins from Mike Macdonald. So yeah, but one thing I will say about the Baltimore Ravens is even if they're not like a super great team, like even in the years where they finished like 9-8 or finished 9-8 before, or like, I don't know what's a better example, 5-11 when before Lamar came around, like even in those years where they were kind of treading water in between being like a fringe playoff team but not necessarily good enough to compete with the Steelers for the division, even between those years they always played tough. Like they could always be prepared for a primetime game, and there's the mantra of play like a Raven, and it's just playing hard-nosed football, and that's exactly the identity of the team that John Harbaugh has built in Baltimore. He doesn't have a bunch of players, he has a bunch of Ravens. And one thing you guys should check out if you are interested in like Harbaugh's life and his day-to-day, here was an article in 2013 published like talking about his day-to-day, like week-to-week life as an NFL head coach, and the training regimen and what he does to prepare for games is absolutely incredible. I know that NFL head coaches in general, they just have a really tough job. Like they work tirelessly. You gotta have an amazing work ethic just to make it as an NFL head coach. But Harbaugh, he always has his team prepared for so many reasons. Like they are always on the same page, and they always know when they have an opportunity to go in and completely ruin a team's season and completely spoil something special that the other team is building. And last year, they had one of the best teams ever. Like, I will go ahead and say it was probably one of the best teams ever that did not win the Super Bowl. But what's missing from this team to get a ring with Lamar Jackson? Because you had a top 1 defense in the league last year. You had the MVP. You had Zay Flowers playing out of his mind. You had Isaiah Likely filling in incredibly for Mark Andrews. And even when you were getting high-level play from all these guys and you had an elite defense, and your elite defense showed up big in huge contests, and you had your special teams firing on all cylinders, and you had everything going right, you still didn't win. So I hope, much like Kyle Shanahan, I hope Lamar is able to get his ring, because honestly, if it didn't happen last year, I don't know when it's going to happen, but Harbaugh will always have this team be competitive, especially when Lamar Jackson is quarterback. Now, number 1, we have Andy Reid. Like, who else? Who else at this point are you going to crown as the best coach in the NFL? He is a top 5 head coach of all time, minimum. This team is always disciplined. Even this year, when they had their definitive worst team of the Mahomes era, they still won the Super Bowl. So there's a lot of credit to go around as far as who built the Chiefs organization. Like, obviously, Mahomes himself deserves some credit. Reid deserves some credit. Alex Smith deserves even some credit for helping Mahomes become a pro. Veach deserves some credit for being the best GM ever, in my opinion. And Dorsey deserves some credit for the way that he was able to get some good playmakers for when Reid was able to hand the reins to Smith for him to take over the team in general to be a starter. And 128-51. I'm willing to bet, even without looking, that that's probably the best record in the league since 2013. And that was with Alex Smith as your quarterback for 5 years. So, 5 years, 2013, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, 5 years. And obviously it didn't work out in Philadelphia. But it was one of those situations where he may have just needed a change of scenery. But credit should go to him for being able to coach up rookies like no other. Guys like Humphrey, guys like Bolton, guys like Smith, guys like McDuffie, guys like Snead. They're all like bona fide top 10 positional talents. And all those guys, besides McDuffie, were taken in the second round or later. So you can pretty much get anything from Andy Reid and his strong positional coaching staff. And you're pairing him up with Steve Spagnuolo, a guy who ran a defense that relied on a very physical two-corner tandem, and you have great interior pass rushing from Chris Jones, none other than Chris Jones himself. So yeah, Andy Reid, he's been able to modernize his philosophy and modernize his coaching styles in the NFL. He's been able to shed that label of him not being a good clock manager and not being able to get it done in crunch time, and he's done it in a big way. 3 rings over the past 5 years. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.